Hello, my name is Jesse, and I did a short presentation for the Goethe Institute DRIN Children's Books webinar on diversity and representation. I'll tell a little bit about my own background for the lecture. I have a master's in anthropology, and I've also lived abroad in Winnipeg, Canada, and in Beijing, China. And I've been drawing comics for over 10 years, and I'm an artist, so I look at representation both through an academic lens and as a creator. So here is the lecture. Hello, I'm Jesse Matilainen, and I'll keep my presentation short. I'll be talking about different concepts that kind of help in understanding how we draw and kind of create representations of people and things in the world. And I figured I'd start with stereotypes, as they are usually the first thing people want to avoid when they draw, but which are also actually one of the kind of greatest tools that we have as illustrators and comic artists and kind of artists of visual storytelling, I'd say. And stereotypes, they usually have a pretty bad reputation, and it has to do with the fact that if you say what a stereotype is, it's what we think of the world before we actually know anything about it. But we use this kind of thinking a lot. So as you can see here, I drew a not very well drawn pair of scissors, and I drew this without thinking about them. So instead of using a model or even kind of thinking about how scissors are made, I just drew what my symbolic idea of scissors was. So they have handles, they have the edges, and there's something that holds it all together in the middle. This is basically a stereotype. It's a stereotype of scissors, and it's the only way that I or anyone else can recognize things in the world is through these symbols that we have. So we see many different kinds of symbols in our lives. We might see short scissors or scissors with huge handles or small cutting edges, or we might see long scissors, and all these together make up our idea of what scissors should look like. The problem is if we don't actually have much experience of the things that we are we have a symbol for, so we might get these ideas from the TV or newspaper articles. We might not actually be looking at actual scissors. We're looking at cultural products that are kind of creating our symbolic idea for us. In drawing, usually this problem is sidestepped a little bit. You have technical drawing where you kind of start to understand the basic parts of a scissor, and you start to be able to create them in three-dimensional space again and again. Or you have the classical way of drawing only things that you see, where instead of drawing symbols, you're trying to avoid thinking about symbols, and instead you're drawing very specific objects in time and space, individuals. Both can be used in drawing characters or coming up with characters, but they're not really the kind of best way to communicate an idea in a story. Usually you want to use stereotypes of some kind. So I guess my point for stereotype is that you should kind of think about where your symbols come from, and you can actually work on getting them to be better and better. For example, by doing studies of scissors or other things as well. So continuing on from these symbols, the kind of thing that this symbolic way of thinking leads to is that when we think of characters, we usually think of them in an unmarked state, which this stick figure is a good example of. And the unmarked state it's in literary use. It means that the character doesn't have any defining features, just somebody. And usually when we start to come up with a character, that's all we have. Okay, we're going to have somebody who's going on an adventure or whatever. And the symbolic way of thinking gives us these either horrible stereotypes, like these kind of weird scissors that don't actually have anything to do with real scissors, or then the other kind of really good and easy route is to use characters who are like ourselves, who don't really challenge us to think about different ways of being. So, which leads to, of course, over-representation of certain kinds of characters in stories, as certain kind of artists are making those stories. And I guess normalcy or normality it's kind of like air that we don't really think about. It's the easiest route that we can choose to go anywhere, and everything is in this kind of unmarked normal state until it meets somebody else who is different from them. So this is another kind of technique of visual storytelling, is that how do we tell that a character is, for example, tall? Well, we'll have a character who is not tall. So to be or not to be is the kind of way to get beyond this normalcy. And this is used, for example, in a lot of Japanese Comrade stories. For example, The Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa is a good example. But of course today that format of stories is used everywhere. And the idea is like this. You have the main character. Let's say it's the first guy here. And then they have comrades who are different from the character, but who have a similar life goal or are part of kind of the same entourage or group, who are trying to do something with their lives. And pretty regular is to have these comrades be different from the main character, always in one way. So we might have characters who are female, but only one. We might have characters who are even disabled. You could have somebody in a wheelchair or otherwise not walking around, but again, just one. And you might have characters who are unbelievably strong. This is pretty common in young people's stories. So this is a way to have characters who are not all the same, right? So everything's good, except the thing that happens here is when we use this comrade model is that all the kind of marked states, like being a female or disabled or even physically strong, they become the exception to the norm. So we have a woman who is a woman because everybody else is male. We have a disabled person who is disabled because everybody else is considered not disabled. And what usually happens is that as we go through all the characters, the main character, who actually would be this guy here, and now that I look at these pictures, because we have the tall guy but everybody else is short, so the short guy here is still in that unmarked state, and his normalcy kind of becomes the center of everything. He is in no way distinguishable from the group. He is the group, and he is normalcy again. So instead of kind of creating a world with a lot of different characters, we created a hierarchy where minorities are always just one of many, but the main character is normality. And this kind of otherness is, or a way of kind of looking at otherness, it works in a way. It can give you a lot of leeway. But there is the otherness of groups as well. So let's say those were our main characters, and now we have this other group here. Sorry, they're just going to be the same, all of them. So now we have a different kind of dynamic. Instead of being individuals, we are looking at groups, and the same thing happens. So this group is like this, so the other group is very different, and through this difference we kind of get a new idea, that is ethnicity. So when two there's actually two very different ways of looking at groups. The other is binaries. Get that. So what is the difference between ethnic groups and binary groups? Ethnic groups are what you would call different cultures. Of course, everybody knows that much, but ethnicity is kind of a little bit more complex actually. So again, we're walking happily in our unmarked state of we're just, somebody, anybody, nothing special. But the moment we meet another person who maybe is like us in many ways, but has a different culture. They might dress differently, for example, like here. This is all just made up. I don't know actual cultures used here. So ethnicity is created the moment these two characters meet, because that is the moment they realize that what they think of as normal is not actually unique to the world. It's not natural. Instead, it's unique to their own culture. So what they've been like, what has been surrounding them like air, culture, suddenly becomes something specific, something which has a shape and which has customs and choices. So ethnicity brings into question these world views that we might have, where we think that our way of life is natural and normal. And you could even call ethnicity this, I don't know, like everybody comes from a different background, but when you have this feeling of ethnicity, you are becoming aware of your own culture. And this, I think, as artists, is something that we can cultivate in ourselves and should. Not maybe like tourism is not what I'm talking about. It's going for example, to have dinner in a family where the customs for having a dinner is different. It's when you kind of realize that your normal is not the normal of other people, which in tourism might not actually happen to most people. But then there's binaries as well. So this, I guess, could be usually used as an example of men and women. So again, the stereotypes. Sorry. In some culture, these binaries are kind of overemphasized. So you might have like American superhero stories where guys are like these huge things and women have like huge hair but are actually very small and kind of big breasted or something. So this is kind of the same binary, just through a different cultural lens. So we might view them as, okay, men and women are not the same, but they are a little bit different, but they have more in common than not. Or we might see them as completely like so different that they cannot meet in any way. And this goes back to the kind of this way of drawing that where we want to overemphasize something, then we can use visual cues to do that. But of course, life is not that simple. Sorry, I'm just gonna move this here. So usually when we have these kind of binary world views, like for example men and women, then there will be people who are kind of both, or people who are neither, or people who are maybe sometimes male but then become women at some points, or you can have people who other people see as female but are actually male, and you know, all these kind of weird places that go around and kind of don't really fit into this binary that people use in everyday life, like men and women. We use those concepts in everyday speech, even though we might even be aware that a lot of people don't actually fit into these categories. So I wanted to kind of talk about queer as well, because it's a really useful way of thinking about these concepts. I don't think of queer as, you know, just homosexuals or something like that. I think of it more like that they are the people who are left out. So it doesn't really matter if it's, you know, male or female. It could be that the world is made out of, you know, bunnies and hedgehogs. So who would be the queer character in a world like that? It would not be the same as in this, you know, men and women, or this concept is kind of, it's so much bigger than a simple binary of sexuality or gender. So kind of giving it to you guys as a way of thinking about your characters, that in what world are they queer or are they not, or are you queer in some ways but not in others. And I think the object of art in general is to kind of try to transcend these weird symbolic ways of thinking, and maybe today we'll come up with ways to do that. So thanks.